Joe, how are you doing? Thanks for meeting me.
Awesome, Phil. Thank you so much for having me today. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I appreciate it. So let's dive right in. Tell me all about Mythic Markets.
Yeah, Mythic Markets allows almost anybody to invest in fractional shares of their favorite vintage comics, collectible cards, fantasy art, and video games. For as little as $20, and so it gives people an opportunity to invest in the things that they love.
Very cool. So how do I sell, trade, get in the inside? Like, how do I get into it? How do I start?
It looks like you're not you're a big collector behind you yourself. You got like some amazing, surrounded by some amazing things, probably very valuable things, and these are assets that have been. Being the market and gold and real estate and just been amazing investments, particularly over like the last year and the pandemic and as people are hedging against inflation, probably. And so we make this possible to invest in small pieces of these things. And so you log in, you create an account, you can participate in essentially an IPO. These are what are called Regulation A plus offerings, so they're like mini IPOs, and you can invest in these shares. And then after a set period, you're able to trade those shares with other people on the platform. So getting started and getting involved is super easy, and so that's what we aim to do.
Cool. So on the IPO front, what's different from a traditional IPO, and how do you figure out how long it lasts and how to price?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of like what's sort of different, I mean, it's really like kind of 80% to like a normal IPO, like that you might buy of Uber stock or Apple or perhaps GoCollect one day. And so something that's traded on like an exchange like the Nasdaq or the New York Stock Exchange. These are most of the way there, except that these are a bit simpler because they are for an inanimate object and don't necessarily have like a lot of the back office and stuff like that. And so it's really focused on just that asset. In terms of like how it's priced, we get a lot of data from some of the large marketplaces out there. Also, we've been a long time and very happy customer of GoCollect, and get a lot of like data points there for some of our comics and that sort of thing. We use essentially any and all publicly available sources of market data for previous sales, and that's kind of how we price. We don't use any private sales data just because it's not verifiable.
Sure.
But we do our best to try to get as many data points as possible in terms of pricing.
Very cool.
So
Thanks.
yeah.
So what about like what's on the horizon? Any cool stuff coming up that in terms of the actual like offerings themselves?
So we've got a number of video games and comics and things like that coming up, like a Super Mario Brothers 3 that we're looking forward to launching. It
Left or
is
right?
a Right Bros variant, but yeah, we didn't win the Left Bros version of this, but that's sort of the one to get. I did get an opportunity to talk to Dennis about at WADA about like what makes these things special and how to kind of like differentiate between them, and got a great lesson there. So that's one thing. Also, like a journey into Mystery 83, which is like the first Thor. We have a ton of Magic the Gathering alpha art that we're really excited about. We have a couple of pieces in there that are like sort of low to mid seven figures, and so those are really exciting. Like for me personally, as a longtime Magic player and fan, so got a lot of cool things coming.
Yeah,
I mean, we have a similar sort of setup as you guys have there, but yeah, it's always a pleasure for me to kind of go into our vault and sit in my desk chair and spin around and look at cool stuff.
Right on. I hear that. Yeah, I was lucky enough. Somebody came in and set this up for me. I didn't have to do it. And I'm noticing on the top shelf up here, I have things that I haven't even checked in yet. I was messing with an app and experimenting, and it's like, oh, well, there they are. So yeah, no, it's always fun to sit and look around and enjoy. Very cool. So tell me one thing that just mesmerizes me in terms of trying to figure it out. The name Mythic Market. Like, tell me what makes it truly mythic.
So for those that I guess are listening and not from sort of the fandoms, Mythic really is about sort of the most rare and sought after collectibles, and really it's a way of sort of gauging the rareness and the desirability of those things. And so we source from a number of different places to bring some of these grails in these collections to our investors. And so that's sort of the origin of Mythic, and specifically actually Mythic rarity is sort of used in going back to Magic the Gathering as the most rare version of something.
Right on. Cool. I like the borrow. It's very nice. So there's a couple of players in this space. And, it seems to be getting some good attention. What sets your company apart? Like, what makes you different? What's your value play?
So, I mean, we are really focused on the sort of the fandom experience, and fandom is really defined somewhat broadly here, but primarily like sort of geek fandom. So we are sort of niched in like the comics and collectible cards and fantasy art and video games, and so I think there's potentially a lot of value in bringing together the fans of this stuff into a single platform where maybe they're not fans of other asset classes. And so, this may be, relatable to even sort of GoCollect's audience where, there, as we look behind you and the types of things that, GoCollect sort of brings together, there's a shared interest in this stuff. And certainly there's overlap with other interests, but, we believe that like we have an advantage in terms of like going deep and creating experiences around, going deep into these fandoms, where it may be less appropriate to intermingle really way transcend things that are sort of like tangential to like geeky collectibles. So like maybe fine art maybe like has less of a place in this collection than like video games, let's say.
Yeah, I hear that. Very cool. Will you actually expand into other geekdom categories? I ask, as far as I'm concerned right now, concert posters are the most underpriced and underknown like collector asset market out there. And there's a lot of them, right? There's lunchboxes, Hot Wheel cars. Like, how deep will you go?
I think a lot of it comes down to where the interests are, and the thing that a lot of what's driving interest right now is how quickly the value of this stuff is accelerating, and so that's kind of like drawing a lot of attention to these spaces. In some ways, there are some categories that are sort of Veblen goods where they continue to increase in value as become more popular, and an increase in value and become more popular, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And so those are the types of things that we'll like kind of keep an eye out for. And as you identified, concert posters and stuff are another one of these things that are just like on the rise. And there may be a lot of different reasons for that. And the one that we sort of have noticed most of all has been, a hedge against inflation. We've, as a country, printed trillions of dollars. There isn't trillions of dollars of things to buy, and so it drives the price of what's available way up.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm curious on the looking at things from an investor angle. So you've positioned yourself so you're a security, right? And or each one of these are securities. Traditionally, securities have, cash flows around them. They have a decision team, and the investment is less about or more about how will this make money because of how savvy this security and the people behind it are. So can you just expand more on that and what your value proposition is here?
Yeah, so kind of what I touched upon with like the sharp increases in price and volatility and liquidity, frankly, I mean, of this stuff, like there isn't that much liquidity, but it is an asset that's been like blowing up in terms of value. And so really like securitizing this is less about the asset generating revenue and making it accessible to anybody that would otherwise want to participate in it. Now, to be fair, this stuff can generate revenue. It can be like loaned out into a collection or shown or have tickets sold against it, for instance. Or used in a gallery or museum. I personally would probably pay you to be able to be in that vault right now and checking out your cool stuff.
I hear you.
And so you could probably sell tickets to it.
Right.
But it is more about access because, I mean, I don't know what is all in there, but I'm sure there's probably things that are worth quite a bit that, your average Joe doesn't have access, the capacity for.
Sure.
And so, it's more about access, and because of the volatility, like there's the volatility of the values, we are increasing liquidity of this stuff. Cool. So imagine it being more akin to being able to trade shares of, I don't know if this is the best example, but like gold or something like that, where there's an actual asset behind that thing. I'm wary of using crypto as an example, but where there's an actual thing behind it.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So really part of the investment is an investment in you and your team to make good decisions, as well as decisions along the way in terms of how to monetize the item itself. Is that fair to say?
In some ways, a big part of it is the curation, and so being able to like source those like super rare things, those things that have the potential to perform as an investment. And so, so that's something that we spend a lot of time on. It would be less about necessarily about like generating revenue than to like unlock the liquidity of this thing that's just rapidly increasing in value. Mm-hmm. I mean, like at the end of the day, it is while it is structured like a business, they are really investments in the actual thing. Just like you might buy, I don't know, people like to buy and sell like comics and video games and collectible cards and stuff, or anything else that they might want to like buy and hold, and then trade away later. It's really more of like that example, but at a smaller, like a lower dollar amount. But in those things that have either historically performed or have the potential to, really to increase in value. So, an example would be like, they're like comic books, for instance. Like comic books are largely driven, the comic book awareness is largely driven by like the superhero film genres and, new shows that are coming out and that sort of thing. And so as more and more people become aware of, these heroes and these characters and so forth, they become more aware of the stories, of the origin stories, and then also wanting to invest in those things. So I think it was All Star Comics 8, which was the first Wonder Woman that, 2 months after the film came out, a copy sold for $930,000. When prior to that movie coming out, like there was it was more of a sort of a cottage sort of audience. But suddenly you had 2 billion people worldwide that were now fans, and that drove the price. So less about like how the movie performed at the box office and more about like the demand for the book.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Golden Age comics are very similar that are not superhero specific. You have people that get caught up in the notion of this crazy art that they've never seen before, and new collectors create frenzies well, new collectors with big dollars create frenzies in the actual auction space, and then all of a sudden prices skyrocket. So I get it. That makes a ton of sense. A lot of that though is driven on when to sell, when to buy, and when to sell. And I'm curious, how does it work in terms of the decision-making process? If you have, a mature security at a certain point through one of these assets, who determines that the market is the right market to sell in, and how does that work?
So I would say that there's probably two primary mechanisms for the disposition of the entire asset. One being that someone comes in off the street and says, "Hey, I want to acquire this thing," and then makes them an offer to acquire it. And so we take those offers and we poll the shareholder base to determine, like, okay, well, shareholders, like, do you want to sell this thing? And that's sort of ranked, not ranked, but like sort of calculated pro rata based on what people own. And so if a decision to, if the shareholders decide not to sell it, it doesn't sell. Okay. The offer is rejected. But if the offer is one that the shareholders want to accept, then that goes up to our investment committee to make the ultimate decision. So we poll for sentiment, and we make a decision at the the manager level. Is basically how it works. So, short answer, the company has the exclusive right to accept or reject, but we do pull for sentiment.
Gotcha. So you would rely on a model that waits for a buyer. Is that safe to say, rather than an auction type method?
In general, most people will get liquidity through trading, but if somebody wanted to acquire the whole thing, that's how we would do that. The other side of it is in that, like, for instance, in that Wonder Woman example, during peak market conditions, where we could actually like capitalize on, excess interest, then that might be a situation where we would, turn the book over in this case, or turn the asset over.
That makes sense. As someone who tends to buy at retail and sell back through the same people I buy through, there's always the collector's dilemma of I didn't pay a fee as a buyer, but when I go to sell it, in order to capitalize on a lot of these folks' giant market presence, there's a nasty fee that goes in that's not necessarily one-on-one with the stock market in terms of actually selling a large asset. I realize yours is a little different, but this piece is definitely of interest to me. Is there, I imagine, a lot of success with your company over the next, let's call it 5 to 50 years. And in that amount of time, there's a lot likely to be a lot of sales that occur of individual items, whatever the case may be. So that's why I'm curious. And the notion of waiting on a buyer negates my question that I'm about to ask, which is, how do you actually, how do you solve that collector's dilemma of, our market share price is X. When we go to sell it, there's a, hopefully a differential that's higher, but we'll have to pay a percentage on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, there's probably going to, there's going to be like marketplaces that, exist to connect buyers and sellers. And there are, often fees to do that, just like the, regular stock market, any kind of market that provides that service and that value. And, I think there's always a push to sort of drive down the cost of that, just because, especially if you're talking about like at the like lower levels, like for instance, like a lot of people like to buy and sell individual cards, for instance. And a lot of times those cards are $10 or something. And then when you factor in like fees and shipping, I mean, that's when shipping even, the cost of a stamp and an envelope like start to add up too. And so, those are things that people try to sort of skirt around the marketplace, the marketplaces and stuff. I mean, I think there's always going to be some kind of a fee for that, whether it's, done in fractions or whether it's done in, in the whole or in a marketplace or online or offline. offline, there are sort of conveniences afforded, for these services that people want to be compensated for. I think like there's probably always going to be some form of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think like the goal is to make it less painful. And so, through trading, we actually don't charge any fees on that, and even on the disposition of the entire asset, we actually don't charge fees for that either. So there may be an opportunity, especially as we kind of get to scale, to be able to save on some of those collectors dilemmas type of decisions that I know people struggle with, and whether it's on like, probably eBay is sort of the quintessential example of this, where people are buying and selling on there, and it just things are there's a cost involved.
Yep.
Actually, maybe one that's more relevant to like the GoCollect situation too is, or the experience as well, is like auction houses are a really common place to sell this stuff, and auction house fees, at least on the surface, unless a better deal is negotiated, are really high. And but I guess on with that said, it's usually paid by the buyer. So I guess there's that.
That makes sense. Well, yeah, I am, wickedly interested. I can't wait to see how things go. As we wrap up here, is there anything else that you want to kind of throw out there for your audience that may see this?
I mean, I think like it's just a really exciting time for collectibles in general. And it's like kind of no better time to get involved. And there's always like new things sort of popping up. Video games are sort of a new entrant. I think like the concert posters are going to be really interesting. Even like movie props and stuff like that. I mean, as I think like most people should probably be wary of sticking to cash, and so that's a sort of a macroeconomic conversation that's maybe out of the scope of this, but yeah, I mean, I think like there's a reason why these alternative assets have been getting a lot of attention lately.
I do too.
So,
well, thanks, Joe. I appreciate the time, man.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.